There is a growing trend of closing civic space in Uganda. The Civicus Monitor 2021 report rated civic space in Uganda as repressed, to mean that civic space is significantly constrained despite the existence of civil society organizations whose work, especially in advocacy for democracy, human rights, accountability, rule of law, and constitutionalism, is regularly impeded. Acfim's recent study on the state of civic space in Uganda highlights human rights, rule of law, freedom of assembly, and association as the most restricted civic space dimensions affecting citizen organizing.
The more this space shrinks and people actually begin fearing their government, fearing to speak out, then democracy is really endangered.
According to the study, a number of restrictive and draconian laws have been enacted to restrict civic space and constrain citizen organizing. Some of the laws singled out include the Computer Misuse Act 2011, the Public Order Management Act 2010, the NGO Act 2016, the Anti-Terrorism Act 2002, and the Press and Journalist Act 1997, among others.
And we are seeing a rapid descent towards authoritarianism, and this is not a phenomena that Uganda wants to see.
The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development Assistance Committee has made a draft of recommendations on enabling civil society in development cooperation and humanitarian assistance to respect, protect, and promote civic space in line with rights to the freedoms of peaceful assembly, association, and expression.
We strongly believe that, including government, to ensure that there is a conducive space where access to information is enabled, systems are in place to ensure that, yes, the law is implemented as required.
In today's episode, we zoom in on the state of civic space in Uganda and its implication on the future of citizen.
Welcome to Acfim Talks, and that's the opener that brings us into this discussion. It's the state of civic space in Uganda. What does the future hold for citizen organizing? Your host is Felix Kafuma, and once again, you are most welcome. Today, the Friday, 18th of November, your host. I have with me two distinguished guests that I will be introducing in a short while. But before I get into that part where I introduce my guests, let me first take this opportunity to invite everybody out there who is just tuning in for the first time to log in onto our social media platforms. We are live on Twitter. Our handle is at Acfim UG. We're also live on YouTube, Acfim UG, and also we are live on Facebook. You'll be able to get the notifications, and you will not be missing any of these these weekly Acfim Talks episodes that we have been running for the last 2.5 years, almost making 3 years. And at that juncture, also allow me to bring on board or bring in focus our guests for today. I'm joined by a lady and a gentleman, both of them with a legal background. Let me start with the lady. She's called Bukira Maria. You are most welcome. I hope I can hear you and you can hear me.
Yes, Felix. Thank you for having me.
Yes, Bukira Maria works with Women's Pro Bono Initiative, where she works as the advocacy and communications manager. She is a human rights lawyer and she's a human rights lawyer and a women rights activist. Currently working with Women's Pro Bono Initiative. She's also a social justice lawyer, passionate about social change. And like I said, she mainly works as an advocate for women's rights through research, advocacy, and media. It's great to have you, Bukira Maria, on today's edition of Acfim Talks.
Thank you, Felix.
Our other guest is Okot Robert, who is a regular on Acfim Talks. Okot is also a human rights lawyer, has worked with National Democratic Institute for International Affairs, NDI, also worked with Alliance for Finance Monitoring. He has supported into the drafting of the campaign finance bill. He's a political finance regulation and legislative advocacy expert. He's also an expert in non-profit law. He's currently doing part-time work with PILAC, and PILAC is Public Interest Law Clinic. Okot, it's good to have you again on set.
Thank you very much, Felix. And you're welcome, right. Maria.
Thanks,
All
Robert.
right. Today, like I said, we are discussing the state of civic space in Uganda, and both my guests have a legal background. And also both my guests have had a stint. One is still working within the civil society sector. The other has had a stint within the civil society sector and still does part-time work on public interest litigation. And let me start with you, Maria, from where you are at, just briefly, to give us your take on the current state of civic space. You've seen the different ratings by Civicus. Freedom House rated Uganda as civic space as not free, and yet Civicus rated Uganda's civic space as restricted and constrained. Acfim's recent study also has rated Uganda's civic space as restricted. What is your take?
Okay, thank you, Felix. First of all, I believe that those two mean the same things. It's a matter of semantics, that if something is not free, it's actually restricted. So when you're looking at the civic space in our country, you're going to look at various aspects. You're going to look at the social context. You're going to look at the legal frameworks, and ranging from that, we can see that there has been restrictions in terms of the social context, in terms of organizing, in terms of freedoms of expression, speech, but all these restrictions are manifest through the legal frameworks. The legal framework is one of the tools being used to repress and restrict the liberties that we have as civic actors, civil society actors, to operate within this civic space. So one may inquire, what is the civic space? So civic space, it's this layer between the state, business, family, in which citizens can organize, debate, and act on whatever issue. It can either be political or non-political. So we have seen instances where even the non-political discussions have been targeted, that people's freedoms, once you're having a discussion and it's even just light banter, but as long as the subject of the discussion is a political head, you have been seeing people being witch hunted, people whisked away in drones, threats being made, even to as something as light as a tweet. So from that, it is evident that our space is not free. And it's something that is very saddening to see, because while we organize in this civic space, it's not just only for issues of political activism, it's back to the day and day living of people, because all these issues go down to affect even the people in the communities who might not be directly acting in political environments.
Thank you so much, Maria, for providing that bit of a context. This is why I bring you in, Robert. I've seen you on a number of occasions helping civil society organizations whose permits was either suspended or recalled for non-compliance. And I think you relate very well when you talk about a restricted civic space. But just quickly, what are your thoughts? Where we are as Uganda, what are your thoughts on the civic space in terms of the context?
First of all, Felix, I would like to say that civic space is an important aspect of any free and democratic society. And that again plays into the rule of law aspect. However, for this to be realized, the state needs to uphold its international and national obligations when it comes to protecting and ensuring that the people that enjoy this civic space have their rights enjoyed without hindrance. And when you talk about rights, in this instance, we are looking at free speech, we are looking at freedom of assembly, and then the freedom to express themselves. Now, Felix, when we talk about attacks on this civic space, this is not something new. We've previously seen political entities being attacked. For instance, the Uganda Young Democrats used to be one of those entities attacked. You also had at one time the FDC people being attacked on a regular basis during the walk to work demonstrations. The difference today is that we are now seeing civil society organizations also being brought into play. And we should be aware that civil society itself has a big impact it plays when it comes to community development and mobilizing or organizing communities. However, Felix, the things that we need to also ask ourselves, why would the state be so much feel threatened by the growth of civic space or the flourishing of civic space? You have a number of civil society organizations, for instance, that have very big budgets. So they are able to run programs that have the capacity to mobilize citizens, either from agitating for free pads for girls to remain in school, or to get citizens to exercise their suffrage rights. So if you're a state that wants to be in control, you would be worried about the flourishing of such entities. But again, Felix, you also need to know that for the last about 20 years, our international or development partners have increasingly cut budget support to the government and instead channeled that support to civil society organizations, which are trying to see that civic space is as free as possible. So in a way, you find that the state looks at civil society entities as competition. You should not be surprised that the DGF has been under closer scrutiny in the recent few years. And also not shocking that DGF has also found the environment unpalatable, and that's why they're probably closing operations here. But what we need to note is that these are things that are not going to stop, because the moment you allow civic space to flourish, as a state that wants to continue being in power, you will always ensure that civic space is in check.
Thank you so much, Robert. You raise it. There are two things that are significantly standing out in your submission. The issue of state control versus regulation, and you've given a background that kind of like justifies the government actions towards citizen organizing, especially targeting civil society organizations. And let me bring in here Maria, because you are a civil society actor. Is the state misunderstanding civil society organizations, or this is more about the state being threatened by the prominency of civil society? Is it a is it an issue of misunderstanding civil society, or is an issue of threat civil society presents to the state? And when we talk about threat, is that a perceived threat, or is that threat real? I thought civil society is supposed to complement government. What is the problem here?
Thank you, Felix. First of all, I do not think it's a misunderstanding. I believe our state has the resources, human resources of legal personnel who can best advise it on how to understand the operations of civic society working with the state. So I do not think this is something that is a misunderstanding. This is a calculated consolidation of power. That's what it is for me. When you speak about the context within which we operate, and we're having this discussion of power dynamics, we have to understand that yes, the state has power. It was given power through the social contract that we had with the state. We gave it power through elective processes that are supposed to be democratic, to have a responsibility to fulfill obligations to protect, to promote, and observe human rights, everyone's human rights. Now, the question comes in when the state finds itself in a situation that is, how should I term it? They are operating outside the scope of the power given to them by the people, or even they are not legitimate, as would term it. It might be a bit complicated to explain, but what I mean that if this is a government that is democratically elected by people, they should not have unrealistic fears that the people that they elected, who organize themselves in different clusters, because there's also this understanding that civil society misconception, which I believe misinformation is also one of the tools used by the state to drive its agenda. But what I'm driving at is that the misconception that the state, that civil society and community are two distinct things. No, they are not. Civil society is for the community. It is the community. So when you have a community losing hope in the state and finding ways to solve problems that are primarily the responsibility of the state, you see that their relevance becomes questionable. And that becomes an issue of threat. And when they see that threat, they start finding ways to consolidate, to restrict through legal measures, through operative of security forces. All of these things are reflection of a state that is in, I wouldn't call it panic mode, but getting to panic mode. Because as you said, civil society is supposed to be seen as a complementer, a development partner, because most times when they actually speak of development partners, they think about donors outside. No, the local community is a development partner. We contribute to the development of the nation. So instead of enhancing the ability of the community to complement the programs of government, we're seeing that it's being restricted. That even you saw the examples that happened, that organizations that are doing work for women's rights and everything, their accounts were frozen and threats of terrorism bunched on them because the state was in panic mode. And this, if you see the trend of restrictions, tightening of bolts by the state, it's usually around the elective process. Of course, there is that general state of restriction, but towards elections, you see that the freedoms are more restricted, the measures become even more blatant and shameful. They become more shameless, that people are just whisked away in drones without any shame. And the question is, why is civil society being seen as a threat? It's being seen as a threat because of the position our current government is in. this is a government that has been in power since 1986. So really, there are questions about the democracy, about the exercise of rule of law. And if you see the state coming up with the excuses of civil society is painting the government badly to donors so that we can get funding, but we are speaking facts, we're speaking evidence, and we turned to the government, given their power and obligation to exercise what mandate they are supposed to do, and they're not acting. So if there are different ways for people to organize, to find a solution, because it all comes down to one thing, for the better good of the people. So one way or the other, community will find a way to have a solution for the better good of the people, either through the government or through civil society organizing. There has to be a way that even the last person down, commonly known as Omuntu wa wansi, has a solution. So if the solution is not coming from the government, it can come from within us, and that support can be systematic through the civil society organizing. But that should not be seen as a threat if our government was proper in terms of exercising the principles of democracy. Yes.
Oh, thank you so much. And I'll have a follow-up question at some point, talking about a government with delegated authority. Probably we have to look at how the process through which we delegate the power to government, the power you talked about. Council Court.
Yes.
This big animal called civic space. I know most people struggle when you talk about civic space. They tend to limit it to about 2 or 3 dimensions. Majority relate civic space with freedom of information and expression, and freedom of assembly, or the right of assembly and association. But unpack, because I know to talk about civic space, we are mainly talking about 5 dimensions, just to help someone who is trying to figure out what is it that we are discussing when we talk about civic space, and as you unpack it, put it in the context of Uganda as well. That in terms of these different dimensions as a country, from your perspective, this is where we are. This is how this is manifesting.
Felix, maybe what I need to remind you is that civic space is a creation of universally accepted rules that create an environment where the citizens are free to organize, participate, and also engage in meaningful lives with themselves. Now, when we look at a country like Uganda, you could say that in the last 20 years of this regime, you've seen a downward trend when it comes to enjoyment of civic rights or civil society or enjoyment of the civic space. But you see, you also need to look at the impact of having a long life government. Because as the government grows older, some of these issues keep coming up. And you see, when I was introducing, I had started giving you some of the incidents that have shown that downward trend. For instance, from around 2006 elections, you could see that violence has been increasing during elections. And some of the people that suffer as a result of that is people that help the citizens to organize, or people that mobilize the citizens to exercise their rights, including the right to vote or suffrage rights. And then when it comes to 2010, 2011, you again see attacks increasing. You're seeing civil society entities being attacked, their offices being broken into. That is not by mistake. But what we need to know is that these attacks are not against civil society organizations. This is a war against civil liberties. Because the moment you close down civil society entities, it means that these people that have been benefiting from the services of these entities are cut off. Therefore, their liberties are also hindered. You've seen cooperative societies being destructed. You've also seen religious institutions either being co-opted to be blind to the happenings of the day or being attacked as well. But in all this, what we need to know is that these developments should be worrying all of us, because the rights that we advocate for in this civic space are not rights that are given by the state. These are inherent rights. But again, when you look at it, the state uses both administrative and legal measures to control this space that we are talking about. You've seen those suspensions that have been handed down to civil society organizations. That was not the thing before. Previously, they would simply break into some of these entities. But now, the law seems to be the easiest means of closing this space. So, you have provisions in the NGO Act, in the Anti-Money Laundering Act, being used now to close the civic space. Today, if you want to register an NGO, the bureaucratic processes that you have to go through are so cumbersome that you must really be interested. You must have that energy, in addition to having a good amount of money on you, for you to brave through these processes, for you to be able to register an NGO. You'll be told to go and seek a recommendation from the ministry. You'll be told to go and seek a recommendation from the district of operation. You'll be told to go and seek so many other documentations which make it hard for you to register as an NGO. And even when you register, the compliance measures that have been put in place put these entities in a position whereby they concentrate on compliance as opposed to doing the work they have set out to do as an entity. And the end user or the end consumer of services of these entities, the citizen, is the most affected. And that is why I earlier on said that we may not wholesomely say that this war is against civil society organizations, but against civil liberties.
There is a growing trend of closing civic space in Uganda. The Civicus Monitor 2021 report rated civic space in Uganda as repressed, to mean that civic space is significantly constrained despite the existence of civil society organizations whose work, especially in advocacy for democracy, human rights, accountability, rule of law, and constitutionalism, is regularly impeded. Acfim's recent study on the state of civic space in Uganda highlights human rights, rule of law, freedom of assembly, and association as the most restricted civic space dimensions affecting citizen organizing.
The more this space shrinks and people actually begin fearing their government, fearing to speak out, then democracy is really endangered.
According to the study, a number of restrictive and draconian laws have been enacted to restrict civic space and constrain citizen organizing. Some of the laws singled out include the Computer Misuse Act 2011, the Public Order Management Act 2010, the NGO Act 2016, the Anti-Terrorism Act 2002, and the Press and Journalist Act 1997, among others.
And we are seeing a rapid descent towards authoritarianism, and this is not a phenomenon that Uganda wants to see.
The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development Assistance Committee has made a draft of recommendations on enabling civil society in development cooperation and humanitarian assistance to respect, protect, and promote civic space in line with rights to the freedoms of peaceful assembly, association, and expression.
We strongly believe that, including government, to ensure that there is a conducive space where access to information is enabled, systems are in place to ensure that, yes, the law is implemented as required.
In today's episode, we zoom in on the state of civic space in Uganda and its implication on the future of citizen organizing.